A Navy SEAL's German Shepherd dug up a burned dog tag hidden beneath a flower garden. The name on it belonged to his brother, a man who disappeared 14 years ago and was remembered as a criminal. But when an old lighthouse keeper saw the tag, she turned pale and begged him to leave town. Soon, the dog began leading him toward secrets someone had spent years trying to bury. What he uncovered would change not only his brother's story, but an entire town's future. And it all started with one loyal dog who refused to ignore the truth. Before we begin,
we stand
tell us
ready.
where you're watching from.
It's time to protect
And if you enjoy
what
stories
matters.
like this, please like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. The first week of October arrived quietly along the northern edge of Lake Superior. The storm that had swept through Minnesota 3 days earlier had left the countryside washed clean and glowing beneath a pale autumn sun. Golden birch leaves fluttered across empty roads. Red maples blazed along distant ridgelines. Cold air drifted down from Canada and carried the scent of pine, wet earth, and approaching winter. Brennan Cole Whitaker drove with one hand resting on the steering wheel and the other near the window. At 33 years old, Brennan still looked every bit like the Navy SEAL he was. He stood just over 6 feet tall, around 1.83 meters, with the lean, compact build of a man whose strength came from years of endurance rather than display. His face was clean, shaven, exposing a square jaw and sharp cheekbones that made him appear older when he was silent. His dark brown hair was cut short in a military style, though slightly longer than regulations would have allowed. His skin was fair beneath years of wind and northern weather, and his gray-blue eyes often looked as though they were studying something far away that nobody else could see. Today, those eyes looked tired. The tactical olive combat shirt he wore had faded from countless washings. The cuffs were frayed. His old military watch carried scratches from deployments on 3 continents. In the passenger seat sat Morrow. The German Shepherd was 6 years old, black and tan, with intelligent amber eyes and a powerful but balanced frame. His ears stood alert even while resting. Unlike many dogs, Morrow rarely barked. He preferred watching, thinking, judging. Sometimes Brennan felt the dog understood more than he should. The veterinary clinic appointment in Duluth had been routine. Morrow was healthy. The problem came afterward. A mudslide caused by the recent storm had closed the main highway south. The GPS rerouted them through a small lakeside town Brennan had never heard of before. Harbor Lark population, 2,100 estimated arrival delay. 52 minutes, Brennan almost laughed. 52 extra minutes. Strange how entire lives could change in less time than that. Neither he nor Morrow knew it yet. The town appeared around a bend overlooking Lake Superior. It looked like something from an old postcard: white churches, weathered fishing docks, small brick storefronts, a lighthouse standing above the shoreline on a rocky hill. The lake itself stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sky. Steel, blue, ancient. Watching, Brennan stopped at a gas station to fill the truck. Morrow immediately jumped out and began exploring the grass near the parking area. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual came next. The dog froze. His ears lifted. His nose pointed toward the distant lighthouse. Then he started pulling. Hard. Easy, Brennan muttered. Morrow ignored him. The dog continued staring toward the hill, toward the lighthouse, toward something Brennan couldn't see, for several long seconds. Then Morrow relaxed, as if whatever had caught his attention had vanished. Brennan frowned. That wasn't like him, not at all. An hour later they reached Rosewind Lighthouse Garden. The garden surrounded the old lighthouse in sweeping circles of autumn flowers: purple asters, goldenrod, late, blooming lupines. Stone paths wound between flower beds overlooking the lake. The place was beautiful, peaceful, almost sacred. Brennan parked near the entrance. He needed coffee. A walk wouldn't hurt either. Morrow trotted ahead through the garden while Brennan followed. The wind carried the sound of distant waves crashing against rocks below. For the first time in months, Brennan felt his shoulders begin to relax. Not completely, just enough. Then Morrow stopped, 20 yards ahead near a cluster of fading purple lupines. The dog lowered his head, sniffed once, twice, then began digging. Fast, urgent, violent. Brennan. The dirt flew behind him. Roots tore free. Flowers bent sideways. Brennan hurried over. Morrow. The dog ignored him. Something was there. Something important. The intensity in Morrow's behavior instantly put Brennan on alert. Years of military experience taught him to trust unusual signals, especially from working dogs. Morrow dug deeper. Then suddenly stopped. His paw struck metal. Clink. The sound seemed strangely loud. Brennan knelt. His pulse quickened. The object was small, buried beneath years of dirt, half blackened by fire. He pulled it free. A military dog tag, burned, scratched, old. For a second, he simply stared. Then he turned it over. The world seemed to stop moving. Jasper W. The letters were damaged, incomplete, but unmistakable. The same brother who had disappeared 14 years ago. The same brother newspapers accused of stealing relief funds before vanishing. The same brother Brennan had spent years hating. The same brother whose name nobody in the family spoke anymore. The wind suddenly felt colder. His hands tightened around the tag. Morrow sat beside him, watching, waiting, as if he knew exactly what had been found. Then something strange happened. Morrow lowered his nose to the dog tag, not the dirt around it, not the flower bed. The tag itself. The dog inhaled slowly once, then whimpered. A quiet sound Brennan had never heard before. Not fear, not pain. Recognition. The voice startled Brennan. He turned. A woman stood several feet away. She appeared around 69 years old, small and thin, leaning lightly on an applewood cane, polished smooth by years of use. Her white hair was pinned neatly behind her head. Blue eyes, still bright, despite age, studied him carefully. She wore a cream cardigan over a faded blue dress decorated with tiny flowers. Though physically fragile, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had survived every hardship life could invent. This was Eloan Bellamy, though Brennan didn't know her name yet. "What did you find?" she asked. Brennan held up the dog tag. The moment she saw it, all color drained from her face. Not surprise. Recognition. Pure recognition. The kind that never fully leaves. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "Right here." Her eyes moved to Morrow, then back to the tag. "No," the word escaped before she seemed aware she'd spoken it. "No." Brennan stood slowly. "You know this?" Eloan didn't answer immediately. The lake wind tugged at her cardigan. Her gaze remained fixed on the tag. Finally she looked up. "You need to leave Harbor Lark." The statement hit Brennan like cold water. "What? Leave? Why?" "Because some things are buried for a reason." Brennan felt irritation rising. "I think I'm entitled to an explanation." "No," the answer came instantly, almost desperately. "You're entitled to leave." Closer to Brennan's leg, watching her. Her shoulders looked heavier than before, as if seeing the tag had added 14 years to her age. The sun disappeared behind clouds as Brennan checked into a small lakeside cabin that evening. The cabin overlooked the dark waters of Lake Superior. Simple, clean, quiet, exactly the kind of place he normally liked. Yet tonight nothing felt. The dog tag sat on the kitchen table. Beside it rested an old phone. A phone Brennan carried for one reason only: the final voicemail from Jasper. 14 years. 14 years he had avoided listening. The notification still existed, unopened, untouched. His heartbeat accelerated. His throat tightened. Then he lowered the phone. Not tonight. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe never. Outside, darkness settled over Harbor Lark. Lake Superior vanished into blackness. The lighthouse beam swept slowly across the water, again and again and again, like a giant eye refusing to sleep. Shortly after midnight, Brennan woke abruptly. A sharp crack exploded against the cabin door. Morrow was already standing, ears forward, body rigid. Another sound, not a knock, something hitting wood. Brennan grabbed the flashlight and moved carefully toward the entrance. The porch was empty. No footsteps, no vehicle, only cold wind. Then he saw it. A small stone resting near the door. Something was tied around it. A folded piece of paper. Brennan picked it up, unfolded it. Read the message. The blood drained from his face. The handwriting was uneven. Hurried. Only 5 words. Bury what the dog found. The lighthouse beam swept across the darkness again. For a brief moment, Brennan had the unmistakable feeling that somewhere out there, Someone was watching. Brennan barely slept. The warning note remained on the small table beside the burned dog tag. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same 5 words. Not because he was afraid, because someone in Harbor Lark knew exactly what Morrow had found, and that meant Jasper's story had never truly disappeared. Morning arrived cold and gray. Mist drifted off Lake Superior and wrapped itself around the shoreline like a living thing. Morrow was already awake. The German shepherd stood beside the cabin door, staring toward the distant lighthouse. Waiting the moment Brennan grabbed his jacket, the dog moved. Not toward town, not toward breakfast, toward Rosewind Lighthouse again. "You're determined, aren't you?" Brennan muttered. Morrow flicked an ear but kept walking. The dog seemed to know exactly where he wanted to go. That bothered Brennan more than he wanted to admit. The lighthouse stood above the rocky shoreline, white paint weathered by decades of storms. Rosewind Lighthouse Garden was nearly empty this early. Only the sound of waves and gulls filled the air. Elowen Bellamy was trimming dead flowers near the stone path when Brennan approached. The elderly woman looked tired, as though she had spent the night arguing with old memories. Her cream cardigan hung loosely from her thin shoulders. The applewood cane rested nearby. When she noticed Brennan, she sighed. "I had a feeling you'd come back. You know why?" Elowen looked toward Morrow. The dog had already wandered farther into the garden. "Some questions hurt more when they're answered," she said quietly. "I've had 14 years to be hurt." The old woman studied him for a moment, then something softened in her expression. "Jasper lived here." Brennan felt his chest tighten. "When?" "Several months before he disappeared." "What was he doing?" "I don't know everything." The answer came too quickly, too carefully. Brennan recognized avoidance when he heard it. Military interrogations taught him that much. You do know something. Elowen looked away toward the lake. "I know he wasn't the man people said he was." The statement lingered between them. For years Brennan had convinced himself that Jasper had abandoned everyone, that believing the worst was easier than wondering. Now an old woman was quietly destroying that certainty, before Brennan could ask another question. Elowen shook her head. "No more today." Then she walked away, leaving him with more questions than answers. Harbor Lark looked welcoming on the surface, but Brennan quickly discovered something strange. Nobody wanted to talk about Jasper. At the diner, conversation stopped the moment he mentioned the name. At the hardware store, a clerk suddenly remembered work waiting in the back room. Even fishermen near the docks exchanged nervous glances before changing subjects. One older man finally spoke. Only once, only briefly. The man was heavyset, with a gray beard and weathered skin burned by decades on the lake. His name was Hank Dorsey, a retired fisherman. "Some stories are expensive around here," Hank said quietly. "What does that mean?" The old man looked around before answering. "It means people learn when to stay silent." Then he left, without another word. That afternoon, Morrow suddenly stopped beside a rusted fence behind the lighthouse. The dog stood completely still, his ears forward, eyes fixed on something hidden by overgrown brush. For nearly 30 seconds he didn't move. Then he slowly walked forward, through weeds, through tangled vines, toward a section of the hill nobody seemed to use anymore. Brennan followed. The farther they went, the quieter everything became. Even the waves seemed distant. Then Morrow stopped beside a narrow opening hidden behind thick vegetation, a forgotten pathway almost invisible, as if nature itself had spent years trying to hide it. At the end of the path stood a weathered wooden staircase climbing toward the upper section of the lighthouse. And suddenly Brennan understood. The dog hadn't been wandering, he'd been searching. The stairs groaned beneath Brennan's boots. Most visitors would never have found them. Some boards had nearly disappeared beneath moss. Others leaned at dangerous angles. At the top stood a heavy steel door attached to the rear section of the lighthouse. The lock was gone, but the marks remained, deep scratches, old damage, signs that something had once been secured there for a very long time. Brennan ran his fingers across the metal. Whoever used this entrance had wanted privacy. Morrow sniffed around the doorway, then sat, waiting, watching. The same way he had watched the flower bed, the same way he had watched the dog tag. Brennan felt another chill. The dog was leading him somewhere. He just didn't know where yet. Late in the afternoon, Brennan finally met the man everyone seemed to know. Blaine Mercer Alcott. The businessman stepped from a black SUV parked near the garden entrance. At first glance, he looked successful, tall, well-dressed, clean-cut. About 47 years old, dark hair touched with silver at the temples, a tailored charcoal coat, expensive shoes entirely unsuited for muddy northern roads. His smile appeared friendly. Almost too friendly. Mr. Whitaker. Brennan immediately noticed something. Blaine already knew his name. I don't remember introducing myself. Blaine chuckled. Small towns collect information. The answer sounded reasonable. But something. Brennan shook it. The grip was firm, controlled, measured. Everything about Blaine felt carefully calculated. His eyes shifted, then stopped, on the dog tag hanging from Brennan's fingers. For one brief second, the smile vanished, only for a heartbeat. But Brennan saw it. Recognition. Fear. Maybe both. Blaine's expression returned almost instantly, yet not quickly enough. "What is it?" Brennan asked. Blaine stared at the metal, then quietly said, "That shouldn't exist anymore." The words slipped out before he seemed aware of saying them. Silence followed. Lake wind moved through the flowers. Morrow stood, watching Blaine, not growling, not barking, simply watching. The businessman recovered. Old artifact, I suppose. Then he smiled again. The perfect smile, the practiced smile, the false smile, and Brennan suddenly trusted him even less. Night settled over Harbor Lark beneath low clouds. The lighthouse beam swept across the lake, again and again and again. Brennan returned to the cabin feeling more unsettled than before. Morrow paced the porch once before entering. The dog seemed restless, as if something remained unfinished. Inside, Brennan froze. The cabin was wrong, very wrong. A chair had moved. A drawer stood partially open. His duffel bag sat on the floor. He hadn't left it there. Years of SEAL training activated instantly. Every muscle tightened. He checked the cabin, kitchen, bathroom, closet, bedroom, empty. Whoever entered was gone. But someone had definitely been here. Brennan examined his belongings. Nothing appeared stolen. His wallet remained. His watch remained. The dog tag remained. Then he noticed something missing. His breathing stopped. A small photograph. An old photograph of Jasper, the only picture Brennan still carried. Gone. Nothing else. Just that. The realization hit harder than any theft should have. Whoever broke into the cabin wasn't looking for money. They weren't looking for valuables. They were looking for Jasper. Or someone wanted Brennan to stop looking outside. The lighthouse beam swept across the darkness once more, and for the first time since arriving in Harbor Lark, Brennan became certain. His brother's disappearance was not buried in the past. Someone was still protecting the secret. The disappearance of the photograph changed everything. Until now, Brennan had been chasing questions. Now somebody else was chasing the answers. That realization followed him through the gray morning as he drove across Harbor Lark. The town looked peaceful beneath a blanket of low clouds. Fishermen repaired nets, children waited for school buses. Coffee shops opened their doors. Yet Brennan could no longer see Harbor Lark as an ordinary town. Too many people were afraid. Too many people knew something, and now someone had broken into his cabin. Not for money, not for valuables, for Jasper. Morrow sat quietly in the passenger seat. The German shepherd seemed unusually alert. His ears moved constantly. His amber eyes scanned every passing street. The dog had spent years working beside Brennan. Sometimes Brennan trusted those instincts more than his own. This morning was one of those times. The Harbor Lark Historical Archive occupied the second floor of an old brick building near the harbor. The structure had once been a shipping office nearly a century ago. Now it housed newspapers, maps, photographs, and records dating back generations. Inside smelled of paper, cedar wood, and dust. The woman who ran the archive looked exactly like someone who belonged there. Nora Finch was around 60 years old, tall and slender. Silver blonde hair gathered into a loose braid that rested over one shoulder wire. Rimmed glasses perched low on her nose. Her pale green eyes carried the patient curiosity of someone who had spent decades studying other people's stories. She wore a dark wool cardigan over a blue blouse and moved with calm efficiency. Unlike most people Brennan had met in town, Nora didn't seem afraid. She seemed interested. "You must be Brennan Whitaker." Brennan almost laughed. Apparently everyone in Harbor Lark already knew him. That obvious? No, she smiled. But your dog gave you away. Morrow sat beside Brennan, perfect posture, watching her. Nora glanced at him. Beautiful shepherd. He knows it. Morrow's tail thumped once. Nora laughed. Confident too. For the first time in 2 days, Brennan felt himself relax slightly. They spent most of the morning digging through old files, newspapers, property records, photographs, community event archives. Most references to Jasper ended abruptly around 2014. Almost as if his existence had been deliberately erased. Then Nora found something. A large envelope hidden inside an archive box labeled Community Development Projects. 2014 inside was a photograph. Brennan immediately froze. 5 people stood together beside Lake Superior. A younger Elowen's husband, Arthur Bellamy. Sheriff Owen Lark. Blaine Mercer, a German shepherd. And one man whose face had been carefully cut away. Not torn, cut deliberately. Brennan didn't need to guess who it was. His stomach already knew. Jasper. He took the photo carefully. Arthur looked younger, broad-shouldered, kind eyes. The type of man people naturally trusted. Owen appeared nearly 20 years younger than today. His sheriff uniform crisp. His expression serious. The same expensive smile. The same polished confidence. Only the dog remained unfamiliar. A large rescue shepherd with dark sable fur and intelligent eyes. The animal stood proudly beside the group, as though it belonged there. Nora flipped the photograph over. Something was written on the back. 4 words, written in black ink. If anything happens. The wind had strengthened. White waves rolled across Lake Superior. Elowen sat on a wooden bench overlooking the shoreline. Her cane rested across her lap. She looked smaller than usual, older, as if carrying memories required physical strength. When Brennan showed her the photograph, she closed her eyes, for several seconds, then nodded slowly. Arthur kept that picture. You recognize everyone? Yes. Her voice sounded distant, like someone speaking through years rather than across a bench. Brennan sat beside her. What happened? Elowen looked toward the water. My husband died 4 months after Jasper disappeared. The statement landed heavily, she continued. Officially it was a boating accident. But she laughed softly, a humorless sound. When a widow spends 20 years hearing the same explanation, eventually she notices the parts nobody can explain. The lake wind pulled loose strands of silver hair across her face. Arthur wasn't careless, she swallowed. He respected the lake. Brennan listened quietly. He was investigating something. Her eyes moved toward the photograph. So was Jasper. What? I never learned everything. She looked genuinely frustrated. Arthur refused to tell me details, said it was safer. Her fingers tightened around the cane. A month before he died, strange men began showing up. What kind of men? Expensive shoes. That answer told Brennan enough. Businessmen, lawyers, developers, people who never got mud on their boots. As Elowen spoke, Morrow suddenly rose from the grass. The dog walked toward the old photograph lying on the bench. For several seconds, Morrow stared at the image, completely still. Then he gently placed one paw on the photograph, directly over the picture of the dog. Elowen gasped. The color left her face. What is it? Brennan asked. The old woman whispered something so quietly he almost missed it. That's exactly what he used to do. Elowen looked at Morrow, then at the photograph. The other dog. A chill traveled down Brennan's spine, not because of coincidence, because Elowen looked genuinely shaken, as if she had just watched history repeat itself. That evening, Brennan continued asking questions around town. Most people remained silent. Others claimed ignorance. Nobody seemed willing to explain what Arthur and Jasper had been investigating. Eventually, he stopped trying. If people wouldn't talk, evidence would, and evidence never lied. Not if you found enough of it. Near sunset, Morrow became restless again, the same behavior Brennan had noticed several times since arriving. The dog paced, paused, looked toward the woods north of the lighthouse, then repeated the process. Finally, Brennan grabbed a flashlight. All right. Morrow immediately headed into the trees. The forest behind Rosewind stretched across rocky hills overlooking the lake. Pine needles covered the ground. The scent of damp earth filled the air. The farther they walked, the quieter everything became. No roads, no people, only wind moving through branches. Morrow seemed completely certain of where he was going, which made absolutely no sense. The dog had never been here before, yet he moved as if following a familiar trail. After nearly 20 minutes, they reached a clearing. At its center stood an enormous white pine. The tree had to be at least a century old, its trunk wider than a truck. Its branches stretched across the darkening sky like giant arms. Morrow stopped, immediately, then began circling. Slowly, carefully. Brennan watched. The dog's behavior had changed. This wasn't searching. This was locating. Morrow finally stopped near the base of the trunk. His nose touched the ground. Then he sat. Brennan knelt. At first he saw nothing. Then he noticed disturbed soil. Not recent. The earth here had clearly been dug up years ago. Maybe a decade. Maybe longer. Time and weather had hidden most traces, but not completely. Someone had buried something here, or removed something. Brennan ran his fingers across the uneven ground. His heartbeat quickened. The pine overlooked Lake Superior, far from roads, far from witnesses, exactly the kind of place someone would choose for a secret. Morrow remained seated, watching him, waiting. The last light of day disappeared behind the horizon. Darkness spread across the clearing. Wind moved through the ancient branches overhead. For a moment, Brennan imagined Jasper standing beneath the same tree 14 years earlier. Maybe hiding something. Maybe meeting someone. Maybe running from something. He didn't know, yet. But for the first time since arriving in Harbor Lark, he felt certain of one thing. The answers existed somewhere. And Morrow was leading him toward them, one step at a time. The wind coming off Lake Superior carried the scent of cold water and approaching winter. Brennan barely slept after discovering the disturbed ground beneath the ancient pine. Questions followed him through the night. Questions about Jasper. Questions about Arthur Bellamy. Questions about the people in Harbor Lark who seemed determined to keep the past buried. By dawn, he was already driving toward Rosewind Lighthouse. Morrow sat quietly beside him. The German shepherd watched the shoreline through the passenger window, unusually calm compared to the previous days, almost as if the dog knew they were finally getting closer. Eloan Bellamy was waiting when Brennan arrived. She stood near the lighthouse entrance wearing a long gray wool coat. The morning wind tugged at her silver hair. Her face looked tired, not physically, emotionally, like someone who had spent years guarding memories that had become too heavy to carry alone. Without greeting him, she held up an old brass key. I suppose there's no point hiding it anymore. Brennan looked at the key. What is it? Eloan stared toward the top of the lighthouse, Arthur's room. For several seconds, Brennan didn't move. The old woman had refused to discuss the room for years. Even after Arthur's death, even after Jasper disappeared. Now she was offering access willingly. That alone told Brennan how serious things had become. The spiral staircase wound upward through the lighthouse tower. The climb took several minutes. Dust covered every step. The air smelled of old wood and salt. Morrow followed closely behind. At the very top sat a narrow wooden door. The brass lock was green with age. Eloan hesitated, then inserted the key. The lock clicked. The sound echoed strangely through the tower. Like something waking up, the door opened. The room beyond had remained untouched for 14 years. Sunlight poured through narrow windows, overlooking Lake Superior. Dust floated through the beams. Everything looked frozen in time. A wooden desk, a narrow cot, bookshelves, maps pinned to walls, a radio set. Boxes stacked neatly in corners. Arthur Bellamy's entire world remained exactly where he had left it. Brennan felt like an intruder entering a sacred place. Eloan remained near the doorway. She couldn't bring herself to step inside, not yet. For the next hour, they carefully examined everything. Most items appeared ordinary: navigation charts, fishing records, maintenance notes, weather observations. Then Brennan discovered a metal storage box beneath the desk. Inside were dozens of cassette tapes. Many were labeled, some weren't. Nearby sat an old tape recorder. Arthur had apparently preserved recordings of conversations and observations. Most tapes contained harmless material: weather updates, harbor reports, fishing conditions, local announcements. Then Brennan found one without a label. He inserted it into the recorder. Static filled the room. Then a voice emerged. A familiar voice. Jasper. Brennan instantly recognized it. His chest tightened. He had not heard his brother's voice in 14 years. Not since the voicemail still. If things go wrong, static. Don't let Owen see the original. More static. If they find out. The tape suddenly ended. Silence filled the room. No one spoke. Even Morrow seemed frozen. Elowen slowly lowered herself into a chair. Her hands trembled. Brennan stared at the recorder. The words repeated inside his head. Don't let Owen see the original. Original. What? And why Owen? For the first time since arriving in Harbor Lark, Brennan found himself seriously questioning, but evidence was beginning to point in uncomfortable directions. Unfortunately, evidence wasn't the same as truth. And Brennan knew better than most people how dangerous assumptions could become, especially when grief became involved. That afternoon, Brennan visited Owen's office, not to accuse, to observe. The sheriff's station occupied a modest brick building overlooking the harbor. Owen Lark sat behind an aging wooden desk. He was 70 years old now, tall but slightly stooped. His thick white mustache remained perfectly trimmed. Deep lines marked his weathered face. His pale blue eyes looked tired, not weak, burdened, like a man carrying something he could never put down. When Brennan entered, Owen immediately noticed the tension. You found something. Not a question. A statement. Brennan studied him carefully. The old sheriff didn't appear nervous. He appeared resigned. That bothered Brennan more. Because guilty people usually feared exposure. This man seemed to expect it. As Brennan prepared to leave, his attention drifted toward a framed photograph hanging behind Owen's desk. At first glance it appeared ordinary, a community event from years ago. Dozens of smiling faces. Nothing unusual. Then Morrow suddenly stood. The dog walked directly toward the photograph. His gaze locked onto a single figure standing near the back row. A young woman Brennan didn't recognize. The photograph had been taken years before Jasper disappeared, yet someone had scratched across the woman's face with a sharp object. Not enough to destroy the entire picture, only enough to erase her identity. Owen noticed where Morrow was looking. For the first time during their meeting, genuine fear flashed across the sheriff's face, only for a second. Then it vanished. But Brennan had seen it, and once seen, it couldn't be forgotten. That evening, Brennan returned to the lighthouse. The discovery troubled him, because now there were two separate photographs with deliberately erased faces. Someone had been removing people from history, systematically, purposefully. The question was why. Meanwhile, pressure on Elowen continued growing. When Brennan arrived, he found Blaine Mercer standing beside a black luxury SUV near the lighthouse entrance. The businessman looked perfectly composed as always. Expensive wool coat, polished shoes, immaculate appearance. A man who never seemed touched by weather or consequences. Blaine smiled politely. Mr. Whitaker. Brennan didn't return the smile. What do you want? To help. That answer alone made Brennan distrust him even more. Blaine turned toward Elowen. Mrs. Bellamy, my offer remains available. I'm not selling. The old woman sounded exhausted, but firm. Blaine's smile never changed. You should think about the future. I am. The property requires maintenance. I manage. The town is changing. Good. The businessman sighed softly, as though dealing with unreasonable children. Then his eyes shifted toward Brennan. Something cold appeared behind the charm, only for a moment. Then it vanished. Only people who run out of reasons to stay. For the first time, Blaine had no answer. After he left, Brennan helped Elowen organize materials from Arthur's room. Maps covered the table. Notes filled folders. Most pages remained intact. Others had been removed. Carefully, professionally. Someone hadn't wanted Arthur's records discovered. Late that night, Brennan found a journal hidden beneath loose floorboards under the desk. The leather cover was cracked with age. Many pages had been ripped out. Only fragments remained. Yet the surviving entries felt important. Arthur rarely wrote emotionally. His notes were practical, precise, focused, which made the final surviving passage stand out even more. Brennan read it aloud. The most dangerous person isn't the one taking money. The handwriting grew shakier. It's the one holding the key. The room fell silent. Wind rattled the lighthouse windows. Morrow lifted his head. Elowen stared at the journal. Brennan read the sentence again. The one holding the key. Not the person receiving bribes, not the person making threats, the person controlling access, controlling information, controlling secrets. Somewhere in Harbor Lark, Arthur had believed such a person existed, and apparently feared them more than anyone else. Brennan slowly closed the journal. Outside, darkness settled across Lake Superior. The lighthouse beam rotated through the night, steady, patient, searching, just like him. And for the first time since arriving in Harbor Lark, Brennan realized the mystery surrounding Jasper might be far larger than one missing man. It might involve the entire town. The first snow of the season arrived 3 days later. Not enough to cover Harbor Lark, just enough to dust the rooftops and turn the shoreline pale. The cold seemed to sharpen everything. The lake looked darker, the wind felt harsher, and the mystery surrounding Jasper Whittaker seemed closer than ever. Brennan spent most of those days reviewing Arthur's journals, maps, and recordings. Yet every answer led to 3 new questions. Who was the keeper of the key? What was the original evidence Jasper had tried to protect? And why had so many people spent 14 years hiding the truth? Morrow appeared restless again. The German shepherd paced near the cabin window long before sunrise. His ears remained fixed toward town. His behavior reminded Brennan of deployment days. The dog acted this way only when he sensed something important. Finally, Brennan grabbed his jacket. "All right, partner." Morrow immediately headed toward the truck, as if he'd been waiting for permission. The dog led him across Harbor Lark, past the harbor, past the old church, past neighborhoods Brennan had never visited. Eventually, they reached a small weathered house near the northern edge of town, paint peeled from the siding. The porch leaned slightly. An old pickup truck sat beneath a tarp. Morrow stopped, a nervous habit of rubbing the back of his neck whenever someone looked directly at him. His name was Wesley Pike, and judging by his expression, he already knew who Brennan was. "You've got the famous dog." Brennan smiled slightly. "I guess." Wesley looked down at Morrow. The shepherd stared back calmly. Not threatening, not friendly, simply waiting. The young man swallowed. "My dad talked about Jasper." That sentence instantly changed everything. Photographs still hung on walls. Work boots remained beside the door. A coffee mug sat untouched near the kitchen sink. Wesley's father had died 6 months earlier from a heart condition, and judging by everything Brennan saw, the loss still haunted the young man. Wesley sat across from him at the kitchen table. His fingers never stopped moving. Nervous energy, anxiety, fear. "I wasn't supposed to talk about any of this." "Then why are you?" The young man looked at Morrow. "Because your dog found me." Brennan almost laughed. Lately, that explanation seemed surprisingly common. Wesley finally explained. His father, Martin Pike, had worked as a survey technician for one of Blaine Mercer's development projects years earlier. Nothing glamorous, just mapping land boundaries, reviewing property records, measuring access roads. But Martin had seen things that bothered him, things he never fully discussed. Before he died, he left behind a sealed storage box. A box Wesley had never opened. Why not? The teenager stared at the floor. "Because he told me not to, that's all. He said if anything ever happened to him, somebody dangerous might come looking for it." Silence filled the room. Brennan felt his pulse quicken. Too familiar. The storage box sat in a hall closet. Heavy steel, dust, covered, locked. Wesley produced a small brass key. His hands shook while opening it. Inside sat hundreds of documents, folders, receipts, TS land surveys, tax records, legal correspondence. At first glance, it looked like meaningless paperwork. Hours passed. Brennan reviewed everything carefully. Most documents led nowhere. Ordinary transactions. Routine business. Nothing criminal. Repeated patterns. The kind investigators learned to notice: properties purchased below market value, legal notices delivered days before deadlines, residents pressured into selling through obscure zoning disputes, families suddenly facing expensive lawsuits they couldn't afford. None of it looked illegal individually. Together, it looked organized, calculated, predatory. Late in the afternoon, Morrow suddenly rose from beneath the table. The dog walked toward a stack of folders Brennan hadn't reviewed yet. Without touching anything, He sat directly beside one specific file. His gaze remained fixed. Wesley frowned. That's weird. Brennan opened the folder. Inside sat dozens of invoices, mostly boring: fuel costs, survey equipment, vehicle repairs. Then one receipt caught his attention. It contained a signature, not Blaine's, not Martin Pike's, Jasper Whitaker's, dated only 3 weeks before his disappearance. Brennan froze, because next to the signature someone had written a handwritten note: "Trust nobody after October." The room suddenly felt colder. Morrow quietly placed his head against Brennan's knee, as if sensing exactly what that discovery meant. By evening, the evidence painted a disturbing picture. Jasper had been investigating a long-running operation involving land acquisitions around Harbor Lark. Families were being pressured into selling properties through legal manipulation, not direct threats. Something far more sophisticated, the type of scheme wealthy people preferred, one that looked legitimate on paper, yet ruined lives all the same. The problem was obvious. None of these documents proved who orchestrated it, and the most important evidence was still missing. Whatever Jasper had discovered before disappearing remained hidden. Unfortunately, Brennan wasn't the only person asking questions anymore. The next morning, rumors began spreading. Faster than seemed natural. At the diner, conversation stopped when he entered. At the gas station, people avoided eye contact. By afternoon, anonymous social media posts appeared online. Someone else claimed Morrow had attacked livestock. Neither accusation was true, but truth rarely mattered. Once fear entered the conversation, Blaine Mercer understood that. People didn't need proof, only doubt. The campaign intensified throughout the week. A newspaper editorial questioned outside interference in local affairs. Anonymous flyers appeared around town. One even described Brennan as a violent drifter, exploiting a grieving widow. When Alowan discovered the flyer, she nearly laughed. Violent. She looked at Brennan. You apologize when chairs bump into you. Brennan smiled despite himself. But the damage worried him, because Blaine wasn't trying to defeat facts. He was trying to isolate him, separate him from the town, separate him from potential allies. Classic strategy: divide first, win later. Unexpectedly, several people began pushing back. Nora Finch publicly defended Brennan. Reverend Thomas Gable, the local pastor, mentioned during Sunday service that truth rarely feared investigation. Even Wesley quietly shared information with a few trusted residents. The town remained divided. But Blaine's effort wasn't working as well as he hoped. That seemed to irritate him, which encouraged Brennan. 3 nights later, snow fell harder. Brennan sat alone in his cabin reviewing copies of Martin Pike's documents. Morrow slept near the fireplace. The cabin remained quiet until a knock sounded at the door. One knock, then another. Slow, deliberate. Brennan opened the door. Sheriff Owen Lark stood outside. Snow covered his shoulders. The old man looked exhausted. More exhausted than Brennan had ever seen him. "Can I come in?" Brennan stepped aside. Owen entered, removing his hat slowly. His hands looked older tonight. His eyes, too. For several moments, neither spoke. The silence stretched. Then Owen finally looked toward the fire. "I've spent 14 years deciding whether to tell the truth." Brennan felt his heartbeat accelerate. Owen continued, "I told myself I was protecting people." The sheriff laughed bitterly. Funny how often cowards say that. Morrow lifted his head, watching him, carefully. The old sheriff met Brennan's eyes. And for the first time, Brennan saw genuine pain there. Not guilt, not exactly regret, the kind that never stops aging. Owen took a slow breath, then spoke words Brennan had waited 14 years to hear. "I know how Jasper died." The room went completely still. Even the wind outside seemed to disappear. Brennan stared at him, unable to speak. But Owen wasn't finished. His voice dropped lower, almost a whisper, and what he said next frightened Brennan, far more than the first sentence. "I know how Jasper died." The sheriff swallowed. "But that's not what you should be afraid of." Snow continued, falling beyond the cabin windows, silent, relentless, less. And suddenly Brennan understood that his brother's death might only be the beginning of the story. Snow fell steadily outside Brennan's cabin. The world beyond the windows looked silent, almost peaceful. But nothing inside Brennan felt peaceful anymore. Sheriff Owen Lark sat across from him near the fireplace. The old lawman looked smaller than usual. Age had finally caught up with him. His broad shoulders had begun to bend. The deep lines across his face seemed carved by decades of regret rather than time. For several minutes he stared into the flames, gathering courage, or perhaps accepting consequences. Finally he spoke. Jasper wasn't a thief. The words landed heavily. Brennan remained silent. Owen continued. Never was. The sheriff rubbed a hand across his face. He discovered something people with money wanted hidden. The fire crackled softly. Outside, wind pushed against the cabin walls. Inside, 14 years of lies began to unravel. Back in 2014, Harbor Lark had been changing. Investors arrived. Developers appeared. Property values rose unexpectedly. Boundary disagreements, legal notices, endless paperwork. Nothing illegal enough to attract attention, but enough to exhaust ordinary people. Jasper noticed. Arthur Bellamy noticed. A few others noticed. Together they started investigating. At first Owen ignored it. Then Blaine Mercer approached him. The businessman offered donations, community support, funding for equipment. Nothing that looked like a bribe. Until it became one. Owen's voice broke slightly. I took the money. Brennan closed his eyes. The confession hurt. Not because it surprised him, because it confirmed something worse. Good people sometimes failed. And those failures often destroyed lives. I told myself I was protecting the town, Owen said bitterly. Keeping jobs here. Keeping businesses here. The sheriff laughed softly. There are always reasons when somebody wants to sell their soul. The fire reflected in his tired eyes. But Jasper wouldn't stop. Arthur wouldn't stop either. They kept digging, kept asking questions, kept getting closer. Then one autumn night, everything changed. Owen described the storm: cold rain, heavy fog, Lake Superior roaring beneath black skies. Jasper had called him shortly before midnight, terrified. Not for himself, for the evidence. He said somebody was following him. Brennan leaned forward. Who? I don't know. The sheriff looked genuinely ashamed. I should have gone. But I didn't. The silence that followed felt unbearable, because both men knew what happened next. Owen had stayed home, Jasper disappeared, and 14 years passed. According to official reports, Jasper drowned after a boating accident, but Owen no longer believed that version. Not after everything he'd learned. His boat was found. The sheriff's voice remained low. But Jasper wasn't. Brennan frowned. That detail bothered him immediately. A body should have surfaced eventually, especially in an investigation that extensive, yet it never had. Which meant one of two things. Either Jasper survived, or somebody made sure he wouldn't be found. Neither possibility felt comforting. The following morning, Brennan drove toward the old bridge outside town. Morrow sat unusually alert beside him. The dog had listened to Owen's entire confession, almost as carefully as Brennan had. Since arriving in Harbor Lark, Morrow's instincts had repeatedly guided them toward answers. Brennan trusted those instincts now, perhaps more than ever. The bridge crossed a narrow section of river that eventually emptied into Lake Superior, abandoned years earlier. Rust covered much of the structure. Ice clung beneath its beams. Wind howled through the broken guardrails. Most people avoided the place, which made it ideal for hiding something. Morrow immediately began searching. The German shepherd moved carefully across frozen ground. His black and tan coat rippled beneath the wind. Snow gathered along his back. His nose remained close to the earth. Focused, determined. Brennan followed. The river below surged darkly beneath thin sheets of ice, dangerous, cold enough to kill within minutes. The search continued for nearly an hour. Then Morrow stopped, completely. His body froze. His gaze fixed beneath the bridge. Brennan climbed down carefully, boots slipping against wet rocks. The river spray soaked his jeans. Finally he saw it. A small steel box wedged beneath part of the old bridge foundation, almost invisible, hidden by years of debris and mud. Someone had placed it there intentionally. Getting the box free took nearly 20 minutes. The metal was rusted, frozen, stubborn. Finally it came loose, heavy, much heavier than expected. Brennan opened it cautiously. Inside sat several waterproof packages, a ring, documents, letters, and one small object wrapped separately in cloth. He unfolded it. A simple silver compass. Old worn. The back carried an engraving. 2 initials. J.W. Morrow immediately moved closer. The dog lowered his head toward the compass. Then something unexpected happened. The shepherd gently whined. A sound Brennan had heard only a handful of times in years. Not fear, not pain. Recognition. The kind of sound a dog makes when finding someone long missing. Brennan stared at him, and for the first time, he wondered whether Jasper had met Morrow before. Not directly, but somehow, somewhere. The feeling vanished quickly, yet it left a strange ache behind. One Brennan couldn't explain. Back inside the box, the remaining contents proved even more important. Financial records, property transfer documents, copies of transactions connecting multiple shell companies, evidence of systematic land acquisition, enough to expose corruption, enough to destroy reputations, but not enough to prove murder. Not yet. Blaine Mercer appeared, repeatedly throughout the paperwork. However, every signature remained indirect, protected, layered, careful, exactly the way powerful people preferred. Brennan wasn't disappointed. He was impressed. Whoever built this operation understood investigations, understood evidence, understood survival. The final item inside the box was a sealed envelope, yellowed with age protected by waterproof plastic, written across the front. For Brennan, his hands trembled. For 14 years he'd searched for answers. Now his brother's voice waited inside an envelope. The paper felt strangely heavy, as if grief itself had weight. He opened it carefully. The letter contained several pages, handwritten. Every word unmistakably Jasper's. The first lines hit hardest. "If you're reading this, little brother, then I didn't make it back." Brennan stopped breathing. For several seconds he simply stared, unable to continue. Morrow rested beside him, silent, patient. Eventually Brennan forced himself onward. Jasper described the investigation, the land fraud, the people involved, the fear growing around Harbor Lark. Most importantly, he described why he hid the evidence, because he no longer trusted anyone. Not officials, not business leaders, not even friends. Somebody had betrayed them. And Jasper never discovered who. The final page contained no names, no accusations, no solutions. Only a warning, written larger than everything else. The ink appeared darker, pressed harder into the paper, as if written under tremendous pressure. "If you're reading this, it means I never came home, and the person who killed me is still free." Brennan read the sentence 3 times. Then of the sky darker, the world heavier, because the letter changed everything. Until now, Jasper's death had been a mystery. Now, it was a murder, at least according to the victim himself. The drive back to Harbor Lark felt endless. Snow continued falling. The town appeared peaceful from a distance. Church lights glowed warmly. Smoke rose from chimneys. People walked along quiet streets, normal lives, ordinary routines. Yet somewhere among those familiar faces lived a person Jasper had feared enough to write a farewell letter. Someone who had escaped justice for 14 years. Someone who might still be watching. That evening Brennan returned to Alohan's lighthouse. The old woman listened quietly as he explained everything. When he finished, she looked toward Lake Superior. The same lake that had taken Arthur. The same lake that had hidden Jasper's fate. Tears filled her eyes. Not dramatic tears. Old ones, patient ones, the kind grief saves for special occasions. "Arthur knew," she whispered. Brennan looked at her. What? He knew Jasper was in danger. The realization hurt both of them, because Arthur had died trying to uncover the same truth, the same secret, the same darkness. Later that night, Brennan sat alone beside the lighthouse window. Morrow slept nearby. The letter remained open on the table. Honest. Final. For years Brennan had hated his brother, believed the accusations, believed the lies. Now, all that anger felt poisonous, meaningless. Jasper hadn't abandoned anyone. He had been trying to protect them, protect Harbor Lark, protect the truth, maybe even protect Brennan. Outside, The lighthouse beam swept across the frozen shoreline again, and again, and again, searching through darkness, just like Jasper had, just like Arthur had, just like Brennan was doing now. The difference was simple. He finally knew what he was hunting, and somewhere in Harbor Lark, the person responsible knew it too. The lake was calm for the first time in days. Gray clouds drifted above Lake Superior, allowing thin rays of autumn sunlight to spill across the water. Brennan Cole Whitaker stood outside the lighthouse, staring toward the distant shoreline. The letter from Jasper remained folded inside his jacket. He had read it dozens of times, every sentence, every warning, every unfinished goodbye. Yet one question still remained. Who had betrayed Jasper? And why had Arthur called that person the keeper of the key? Morrow stood beside him. The 6-year-old German shepherd lifted his head toward the wind. His black and tan coat shimmered beneath the pale sunlight. The dog seemed restless, focused, as if something unfinished still waited. Brennan had learned not to ignore that feeling. Every major discovery in Harbor Lark had begun with Morrow sensing something before anyone else, and that morning was no different. Without warning, Morrow began walking. Not toward town, not toward the lighthouse, toward the abandoned office building that once belonged to North Star Haven Development. The company Blaine Mercer had spent years hiding behind. Brennan followed. The building stood empty near the waterfront. Its windows were dark. Its signs had been removed months earlier. Most people assumed but Morrow marched directly toward the rear entrance. His ears stood upright, his body tense. Brennan pushed open the unlocked door. Dust covered everything. Old desks, broken filing cabinets, stacks of forgotten paperwork. The place smelled abandoned. Yet something felt wrong. Too clean, too organized, as if someone still visited occasionally. Morrow led him upstairs, into a locked office. The door had been recently repaired. Fresh screws, fresh paint, fresh locks. Nothing matched the rest of the building. Brennan broke the lock. Inside waited a room that clearly mattered. Shelves lined the walls. Boxes filled every corner. Most were empty, but one cabinet remained untouched. Inside were legal records, property deeds, financial transfers, private correspondence, years of carefully hidden documentation. And at the bottom sat a small leather notebook. Arthur Bellamy's handwriting covered every page. Brennan opened it. His pulse quickened. Finally, the missing pages. And near the end appeared a sentence that made Brennan stop breathing. The keeper of the key is not the man who protects the secret. It is the man who controls who may see it. Beneath the sentence appeared a single name. Blaine Mercer Alcott. Brennan stared at it. For years everyone had searched for a killer. But Arthur's notes revealed something deeper. Blaine had never been the man doing the dirty work. He was worse. He was the architect, the man directing events from behind the curtain. The man deciding who would be silenced, who would be threatened, who would disappear. As Brennan turned another page, something unexpected slipped from between the sheets. A photograph. The last photograph Arthur ever took. It showed Jasper standing beside the lighthouse, smiling. Alive. Holding a folder under one arm. At first Brennan only felt sadness. Then he noticed something strange. In the background stood another person, partially hidden. Watching, only half a face visible. A young deputy sheriff, years younger than Owen. The figure seemed insignificant. Yet Arthur had circled the person with red ink, below the photograph he had written. He saw everything. That afternoon, Brennan went looking for Blaine. He found him exactly where powerful men like to hide when things began collapsing. In public, among witnesses. At Harbor Lark's town hall, Blaine Mercer looked calm. As always, tall and well-dressed, silver beginning to appear along his dark hair. A clean-shaven face, sharp blue eyes. The type of man who could smile while destroying someone's life. People naturally trusted him. That had always been his greatest weapon. When Brennan entered, Blaine immediately understood. The businessman saw the notebook in Brennan's hand. His expression changed for only half a second, but it was enough. Fear. Real fear. The confrontation happened in front of nearly 50 townspeople. Brennan presented Arthur's records, the financial transfers, the forged property agreements, the intimidation campaigns, the evidence hidden for 14 years. One by one, the room grew silent. Blaine tried denying everything, at first then blaming subordinates, then claiming ignorance. The lies became weaker each time, because facts are stubborn things, and Arthur had preserved plenty of them. Finally, Brennan asked the question everyone feared. What happened to Jasper? For the first time, Blaine stopped talking. His silence became the answer. Hours later, state investigators arrived. Sheriff Owen himself handed over every remaining document. The old lawman looked exhausted, but lighter, like a man finally setting down a burden carried too long. By evening, warrants were issued. Accounts frozen, properties seized. North Star Haven officially collapsed. The empire Blaine built over 14 years began falling apart within a single day. Families received notices. Land ownership reviews started immediately. People who had nearly lost everything suddenly had hope again, not because of politics, not because of courts, because one man had refused to stop looking for the truth, and because one dog had refused to stop following a scent. That night, Brennan finally sat alone. The investigation was over. The town was safe. The truth was public. Jasper's name had been cleared, yet his chest still felt heavy. Justice and grief were not the same thing. One could never replace the other. Morrow rested beside the fireplace, watching him quietly, waiting, almost knowingly. Brennan reached into an old storage box inside. Sat the phone he had carried for 14 years. The phone containing Jasper's final voicemail, the message he had never opened. Not once, because hatred had been easier than heartbreak. Until now, his finger hovered above the screen. Then pressed play. Then came Jasper's voice, older, tired, but unmistakably Jasper. Brennan. The room suddenly felt smaller. Morrow lifted his head, listening. If you're hearing this, things probably went wrong. A weak laugh followed. The kind Jasper always used when trying to hide fear. I know you'll be angry. Another pause. But don't spend your life carrying what happened to me. Brennan's eyes filled. The voice continued. Gentle, steady, like an older brother speaking across time. Don't turn pain into your home. The sentence shattered something inside him. 14 years. 14 years of anger, blame, questions, regret. All collapsed at once. Brennan lowered his head. For the first time since learning the truth, he cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly, like a man finally allowing himself to grieve. Morrow moved closer, resting his head against Brennan's knee, the same way he always did when words no longer helped. 1 year later, Rosewind Lighthouse remained standing. Its gardens had never looked brighter, because of what the place represented. Hope, truth, second chances. Brennan had accepted a permanent position caring for the lighthouse and preserving its history. The work suited him. The constant noise inside his mind had finally begun to fade. Alawan Bellamy had moved south to live near her granddaughter. She visited often, usually bringing photographs, usually leaving with flowers, usually smiling. Each morning, Morrow followed the same routine. The German shepherd would walk through the gardens, circle the lighthouse, then stop beside the flower bed where the dog tag had first been discovered. The place where everything had begun. Sometimes visitors noticed. Sometimes they asked why. Brennan never fully explained. Some stories belonged to the heart more than history books. On a clear autumn evening, Brennan carried a small glass display case into the lighthouse museum room. Inside, he carefully placed 2 items, Jasper's dog tag and the restored photograph of his brother. Nothing more, nothing less. The display carried a simple plaque. Jasper Whitaker, he protected the truth when it cost everything. Brennan stepped back. Morrow settled beside him. Outside, the lighthouse beam swept across the lake, bright, steady, unbroken. Above them, thousands of stars filled the northern sky. For a long moment, neither moved. The world felt peaceful, complete. At last, because sometimes a person never returns to tell the truth. So fate sends a dog to do it for them. Sometimes God's miracles do not arrive with thunder, angels, or voices from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through a loyal dog that refuses to give up, through a stranger who appears at the right moment, through a memory that heals a wound we thought would never close, or through a truth that finally finds its way back into the light after years of darkness. Brennan never got his brother back. Morrow could not stop time, and the pain of loss never disappeared completely. But God gave them something else, a path toward healing, a chance to restore what was broken. and the reminder that even when we cannot see His plan, He may already be working through the people, animals, and moments placed in our lives. If you are carrying grief, regret, loneliness, or a burden that feels too heavy today, remember this: you do not have to walk every mile alone. Sometimes God sends help in ways we never expect, and sometimes the smallest act of faith is simply taking the next step forward. If this story touched your heart, please share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell us about a person, a pet, or a moment that helped guide you through a difficult season of life. Your story may be the encouragement someone else needs today. If you enjoyed this journey, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join our community for more stories of hope, faith, courage, and the extraordinary bond between people and their dogs. May God bless you and your family. May He give you strength when life feels heavy, peace when your heart is troubled, and hope when the road ahead seems uncertain. And may His light always guide you safely home.